Happy of Team EnVyUs is one of the most decorated in-game leaders in CSGO history. He's a two-time major champion with teams under his leadership. He has an incredible resume of tournament wins, top finishes. He actually helped innovate a style, this very aggressive, loose matchup-based style, which broke the metagame in late 2014 with LDLC, was actually, in some senses, furthermore pioneered by Fnatic, who kind of tempered it a bit with a bit more team play and more research and in-game leader reads. He was absolutely the best at that era of time at the abusive force buy style, famously with the CZ. And he took the French scene back to the top of the CSGO world again when they looked to be struggling to win big tournaments under existence. Yet this is someone who has proven himself over and over again with consistency now to not be a good leader of men. Now, tactically, he has his place. And certainly he had his era and was very influential and important in the evolution of how the game tactically was played in CSGO. I mean, in some senses, only almost an anti-tactical style, but that in itself was very important in terms of how I think it then forced the development of teams that used a more tactical style, but to counter that, and then how they weaved skill into their tactical approach to meet in the middle ground somewhere. The problem is that leadership is, in the very literal sense of being a leader, is about more than tactics or shot calling. And he can certainly do tactics and shot calling depending on what personnel he has and what era he's playing in. The problem is in CSGO and many esports games, we take these young men, sometimes in some esports games, just barely finished being teenagers, and we say, right, you're the shot caller, you're the tactician, right, you're also the leader. You have to lead this whole group. You have to be the captain, essentially. Now, in sports, that's not the way things are done, you know. You can have the guy who's a shot caller, you can have a guy who comes up with the plan, you can have a guy who's the captain, who's the locker room leader, emotional leader of the team, and those can all three be different people on a team. In esports games, we force them all onto the guy who just shows he knows how to tactically run the game. Sometimes that guy isn't as good at actually calling the tactics. I'd say at times, actually, people like Sean Gers have suffered in that sense. Sometimes those guys aren't at all suited to being the actual leader in the other senses, because oftentimes these individuals, because they are the more bookish, bookworm type guys, who may be part of the reason why they became so intelligent and tactical about the game is they went away and they studied, because that's their way to the top, because they couldn't do it off raw skill or having a primary role in the team, or they were pushed on the outside and that was their way to overcome and to get these great players to play along with them. Whatever the reasons are, these people often aren't suited to actually being leaders in an esports sense, I've noticed. It's quite rare that you get someone who can do all these things or multiple of these things at once and be effective with it. So one of the problems is, I've broken down in the past, I'll link it up here, my kind of thoughts on the different types of leader. And I've given like archetypes as to what those different leaders represent and like examples and how we can categorize them depending on which strength they tend to emphasize. Now, in Happy's case, he falls under the heading of the Odysseus or the Ulysses type leader, because he's the kind of person where people aren't just going to follow him because he's a great leader emotionally. People aren't going to follow him because he's the best player or follow him because he has an authoritative voice. The reason people are going to follow him is because they see that he's smart, that he's knows what he's talking about. They see that he's the guy with the plan. And so what they're doing is they're putting their faith, they're investing it into his cunning and smarts. And the problem for Happy is when the metagame has changed, when the level of his personnel has changed, when some of his players have got into slumps individually and need to be helped out in order for the team to then succeed, he's then in a position where he's not been able to do any of that. And so as his team's stock has gone down and the success has gone down, his own teammates have divested themselves of believing in Happy, of thinking that his way makes any sense. Some of them have even wanted to say in how the team runs, where they maybe don't have much tactical grounding. And so actually they want to say because it's not working and they want to try anything, but you know the old saying, too many cooks. If everyone's trying to have their own little input and change this and change that, it's actually, in some sense, going to make the team worse. You have less of a coherent vision. And so you're not all going to be on the same page. And in Counter-Strike, being on the same page is incredibly important. You really do need to have like the best players in the entire world if you're going to get away without having half decent team play. And as a team like Na'Vi has shown us, that might not even do it right there. That might not be enough. So one of the key aspects of being a leader, especially if you want to have long-term success with multiple different lineups, is you've got to be good at motivating your team. You've got to be able to control the emotional level of the team and figure out when it needs to go up, when you need to calm people down, when you need to give a guy a pat on the back, when you need to bark at a guy a little bit to fire him up and to get something out of them, maybe in an antagonistic fashion. So a core element of motivating people is knowing what they need. And knowing what they need essentially comes from being able to empathize with them and to understand them and to be able to figure out what makes this guy tick, what actually motivates him, what worries him, what things in the game make him uncomfortable. Where can I put him that arouses his confidence again because he'll get rolling, and then I can do extra things with him. You've got to understand all these things in order to be able to bring the best out of these guys. And because when you bring the best out of them, here's the thing. People often think that confidence is about just telling someone, yeah, do better, and then they just perform better in the game. Well, how about if you could move them around in the game or help them out in the game, get their results going in the game, then they will naturally become more confident because they'll feel the game flowing, they'll feel like they're having an impact, they'll feel like they can do their job. It sounds like you've gone the other way around, but I think that's the thing. That's a way to directly solve that rather than just trying to psychologically bend this person to your will to suddenly believe that they're a great player. The problem here is Happy has shown himself to be woeful in this respect. I mean, he's had star players where he didn't really understand what they wanted. Now, maybe some of them told him, oh, I'm fine, we're doing this and that. That's irrelevant. It doesn't matter what they say. It matters what the results in the game are. You've got to be able to read what those are and then figure out what's best for that guy. So you look at some of the players he's had, star players, and a bunch of them have been out of sorts and haven't played that well. Shawks, Kenny S, different periods of time. Then you go and you look at the players who've really struggled in his teams. So Kiyashima literally had to be kicked. He could not be brought out of that hole where he just had given up completely, didn't know his role in the team. Even worse, the team was doing well and he was having no impact, and therefore he just was idling, just doing nothing, and they were just kind of allowing it. Then you have NBK. This is someone where he's had a couple of slumps now where he's become a really poor player, and yet he's been put in such essential roles within the team. This is a guy who has to have confidence in your team. This is a guy where you have to make him realize how important he is and how key he is and how he doesn't have to do everything. Well, the things he is doing is what allows the other ones to succeed. This is someone who was the right-hand man of Happy, and he's let this guy just completely fade away and just become exasperated and frustrated to the extent that NBK, because he's the kingmaker in the French scene, has become exasperated with Happy. And you've seen that the result in terms of interview comments and the way that they've reacted with each other, the fact that NBK took over as in-game leader again for a while. Devil's an obvious one, because here he brought in this young guy, put him in all the wrong roles so that he had no confidence from day one, never adapted to give him a better chance. Eventually, he only became even vaguely approaching decent as a top pro just by becoming the in-game leader himself and having some say in what he did. Even worse, Happy's someone where he had all this hubris and arrogance when he was a champion, that he'd changed the metagame, that his teams would always be on top, that he understood the formula for how to succeed. I'll explain some of this later. And now he's lost confidence in himself. So even he doesn't believe in himself. Even he doesn't believe he can do it and know what the solutions are. And he's just given up to some degree. If you're going to give up and you're going to lose confidence in yourself and you're the leader, how are your troops going to follow you? How are they going to believe? They have to at least be able to believe in you if they can't believe in themselves. That can carry them to a certain degree. That can give them something. That's why people have this notion in war of like the guy with the banner who goes forward. So you see that and it's something you believe in more. You remember your country and stuff. It doesn't matter if you yourself are afraid, or the captain who says, listen, come follow me. I'll keep you safe. Do this. That's a key aspect of battle that someone like Happy has missed out on. There's also the fact that to be a leader means you have to be good at problem solving. Well, what Happy has shown us is that when he doesn't get his way, whether that means results in the game or individually within his team, people don't want to play his way, or eventually they're insubordinate because it's not working, he sulks. He doesn't take it well at all. He can't take it on the chin. He can't accept that he was wrong or that things have gone badly. So in terms of sulking, in terms of the game, that means he just does whatever he wants to in the game still, even though it's not working, and just runs the team into the ground. In terms of inter-team dynamics, that means he just withdraws himself from the team. That means he doesn't put in extra work to figure out this guy, what he needs to motivate him, or what he need to tweak here to make this guy happy. He just expects them to just themselves know what to do and fix themselves. This is someone where when the team themselves have gone against what he wanted, he has just continued to play his style, which only works when the whole team is on the same page with him and he is the in-game leader triggering all the action, and as a result has essentially sabotaged some team efforts and given them almost no chance to win. And for what? To prove a point to them, to prove some petty political point to them about the fact that he should be the leader and everyone should listen to him. This is someone who has shown, with how the last year or so has gone, that he only wants to win on his own terms. You know, when everyone says, oh, I only want to win, all I care about is winning, I'll do anything to win. Yeah, but then when you lose, that's when we see if that's true. Because most people, you'll actually find, They're not willing to do anything to win. They're only willing to win on their terms, when it's how they like and in the manner they want to play and what they find to be fun and the role they think they should have and the role that they think someone else should have. And they want to win who decides all the action and all these other things. And they want to win their way, even if it isn't working. He's someone where he hasn't had the personnel rather, to make his style work in quite a while now. And yet, he has not only initially seemed oblivious to that, but then just lived in denial of it and just decided that it's the whole world that's wrong. He's like that fucking Principal Skinner thing, like, is it me? Am I out of touch? No, it's the children. The children out of touch. Like, that's like Happy with every other fucking successful team in the last year, and he's just sat there doing the same shit over and over and over and over and over again. Just go back and watch some games before EnVyUs actually had totally fallen off a cliff. Watch the game that they lost to Na'Vi in the semi-final of EACA ESL Pro League Season 2 finals, and then watch the semi-final that they lost at Starladder Season 14 to Na'Vi also. In these games, particularly the games on Train, he just starts losing, and they're on CT side, and he just force buys them to oblivion. They would have had to win some borderline miracle rounds to stop his buying strategy, shortening the game and removing all their chances to win. And he did that because he was just decided, I'm not going to change up what I do. I'm not going to alter anything. I'm going to deny what is happening in reality. And I'm just going to force some crazy, incredibly low chance victory out of nowhere. Now, here's the difference. That could work in LDLC. That could work in the old EnVyUs when they had some of the best players with lots of confidence and they felt like their style worked and they had good matchups. Then they could sometimes make that work. In fact, yeah, more often than you'd expect. That wasn't working anymore and he continued to do it. This is someone where, as an in-game leader, he managed to lose a best-of-3 series to NRG, who had a stand-in at the time, for actually their best player at the time, and hadn't played with this guy before. He lost a full best-of-3, and he lost it in key situations, calling from the T side, and just threw away leads, again, with fractured rounds, with slow tactics that didn't work, with greedy lurking style play, with 4 spies that didn't make sense, and threw away scenarios where you had 4 rounds and you could have gotten 2 or 3 gun rounds out of it, and instead you ended up with 1 gun round and a bunch of half buys. This is a guy who did it all on his own back in terms of losing those games. You can't look at them and really blame too many of his teammates for these matches. This is someone where, when he started to fail, and his team did fall off, and then when they got very bad, he didn't put in the time to turn that around and find a new way to innovate the metagame and all that sort of stuff. He didn't study the game. He didn't put in the time watching demos. I mean, they used to laugh in EnVyUs about how when they used to win tournaments, he didn't study the demos and didn't really key in on what opponents were going to do. I mean, he made a comment in an interview when they just won WESG now, where he said something about how he likes Swiss system because he thinks it's fair, because then teams can't just sort of, I mean, this is the gist of what he said. Like, they can't just sort of tunnel on you and then just anti-strat you and prac for you. Like, that says everything about his mindset there. He's trying to be an in-game leader in Counter-Strike, and at the moment his team isn't very good, and he's not studying to the nth degree his opponent. He's not trying to figure out to some deep level what they do and then what his team can do and what the percentages are. He's just trying to play the game, and he actually wishes everyone else did what he did and didn't put in the effort, and everyone just played as though it was like a super mix, and you're in a fucking gather channel, and we pick our teams and we just play each other, and then we're days just calling stuff on the fly. That's really the world he thinks we should live in. That's reasonable to him, as someone who's paid a massive salary to be, in theory, one of the best in-game leaders in the game. This is someone where, because he didn't study the game, when his team went downhill, they had a poor map pool for a long time. What dragged EnVyUs' map pool back out of the gutter was Kenny S himself as an individual figuring out how to become more stable as a star player again. So it gave them consistency on maps like Dust 2, etc., and allowed them to come back with their cobblestone and be more dangerous. And then people like NBK, who has been a winner his whole career, looking at what was going on and seeing how poor Happy's playing, how well Kenny S is playing, and realizing, all right, actually, what we need to do is build around this Kenny S guy. That's something we can build from. That's something that's working. And then going ahead and giving Kenny S the resources he needs to actually be able to properly AWP. Not just give him an AWP like they do with JDM and Team Up and go, yeah, just do whatever you want, mate. We're all going to be doing all this over here. That's not how top-level AWPing works. There's a reason why the best AWPers ever, Kenny S, Guardian, etc., Skadoodle, had teams built around them who flashed them in and set them up and took map control and checked the corner and watched their back and all these things and followed them up, etc. There's a reason why all these things took place in that sense. So this is someone where Oh, but also, by the way, I'll give credit to Apex for that as well. He's someone who's played with Kenny S for a long time, and he also realised when to hop off the Happy train in that particular sense. Happy's own individual style shows that he doesn't put the team first. When it hasn't been working, his lurking style, he hasn't adapted like Get Right has. He hasn't changed it up like at times Hiko did in Team Liquid earlier in 2016. He has continued to play a pure baiting style. And the problem is, that's not working individually. It's definitely not working as a team and within his component of the team. He is determined that his style, both individually and as a team, will work again. Listen to the hubris that this guy had when he was successful. And you'll understand why the fall has been so drastic and he hasn't been willing to make the changes. So here's an interview that he did in August of 2015. So this is the prime of Happy in many ways, because this is when he's got together the new EnVyUs. You know, they've just finished like second at ESL Cologne. They're actually going to win the next major. They're a fantastic team. He says this. They're talking about changing players in the team. He says, yes, that's the EnVyUs formula. That was something I often rehearsed with the previous lineup. We found the formula. We just need to apply it. In the end, we changed some players, but we still apply it today and it pays off. I'm convinced that we will still be able to apply it in 6 months and that it will keep paying off because it's the right way. As soon as your players understand you, understand their roles and what you're asking of them, and give their best, then no matter what happens around them, no matter the egos nor the mistakes, it works. Now here's the problem. He's actually unwittingly explained why it doesn't work. First of all, he said it would work in 6 months from then. 6 months from August, it did not work. Or EnVyUs had already dropped off a cliff at that point in time. Now, in terms of him saying about how as soon as all your players understand you, right, Happy's players no longer understand him. In fact, even worse, they don't have confidence that he himself understands what's going on in the game and where his own place should be in the game and what they should be doing. Understand their roles. They don't. A lot of them have been left out there because of how he has forced them into his system, which when it worked was fine, and taken away some of their strengths and made it so that they're guys who have to do other things than they're used to in their careers. They don't understand their roles. And even worse, because it's been so long, some of them don't know how to go back to their old role and what other people were doing for them because they needed an in-game leader to help with that. Okay, then he says, and what you're asking of them, that's the problem. His style was so loose that he's not asking much. He's just putting essentially fantastic 1v1, 2v2 players into situations where they have a favourable matchup, then supporting that with the rest of the team, and then lurking himself to pick off the kills. And then he's hoping that works. Now, that doesn't work if they then can't do it. If they don't have the confidence, their skill level isn't at the point, and they're totally depleted in every respect, that they can't win those duels that they take in that sense. That's why the whole force buy thing didn't work anymore. Then he says, then no matter what happens around them, so for example, the entire metagame changes, you need to expand your map pool, you haven't studied opponents, well, no matter the egos nor the mistakes, I mean, we've seen right there that the egos and the mistakes have been absolutely the thing that, on top of everything else, has killed the team. It works. It doesn't work. It has provably not worked. Last place at 2 majors, a bunch of terrible tournament performances, haven't won a meaningful tournament, WSG barely counts, in a long time, despite the same year being one in which teams like Cloud9 win tournaments without a great in-game leader and with a bunch of problems, all these other flaws like that. The problem is, Happy's style was based around his strengths as an individual player. And without that, he actually ends up putting his team in a bad position. I mean, even when he had that going for him, he already neutralized the strengths of some of his star players. He took Shox, one of the best lurkers of all time, one of the best clutch players we have ever had in this game. He made him an entry fragger. Now, Shox is so insane, that still would work. I mean, famously when he would just walk into A site on cash by himself and just wreck the first 2 people he met. But when they were no longer winning, now that's when conflict arises. Because if you know Shox's personality and his MO and his track record, when the team no longer is winning, or Shox gets bored of how it's going, that's when he's going to revert back to wanting his style and having some say in what goes on and having autonomy. And that was the problem that caused them to fracture. Then you look at Kenny S. Kenny S came into the team and he would have the odd tournament where he'd be so individually good that he'd look good again. But he was never Kenny S of Old Titan. That only happened after the Happy era. After they started building the team around Happy, essentially where Kenny S's own in-game success had sort of a mutiny effect and brought the team back over to supporting him. Kiyashima, by the end of the game, was a waste, was a mess, has never recovered back to be a skilled player and be someone who can have like a good impact. And yet he had a defined style when he first joined EnVyUs. He became one of the better players in the team. He was doing some fantastic entering at different points in time and on different maps, playing mid-round sometimes. This guy really knew his role and looked like a prime talent to be one of the next great French players in history. Now he's just essentially an average pro who his career looks to be wasted. He's just going to earn money and waste out his time in phase and maybe have some success there if they can have success. But otherwise, he's never going to reach those heights he could have because someone like Happy just allowed him to will away to nothing, have his confidence be destroyed, stop practicing and never did anything about it. NBK is still one of the greatest French players to ever play CSGO. And he was playing this hard support style to help Happy be better and help the team be better. So just to help Happy, he neutralized his own style. The only player who hasn't had his style neutralized by Happy is himself. Well, how convenient. I don't know many leaders who do that. Difference is if Shox does that and builds the whole team around him and demands they play his way, he then kills it and still performs very well. And that's why it's justifiable. And that's why the team can work and can win and can succeed. In that sense, the results do justify the approach. In this respect, Happy's results don't justify his approach. It's no longer funny that he's the star player. That was cool in 2014 and 2015. I mean, look at how he played when they were slumping and he had the in-game leader status taken from him. He didn't adapt and play slightly differently and add a little bit of aggression and information and calling to help the new in-game leader. No, he if anything, sabotaged the game. He played more selfishly. He played more lackluster and as though he didn't care about the game and in a flippant manner, nonchalant. He demanded that his chosen style still be implemented, despite the fact it would not if he's not the in-game leader. So as a result, he wasn't any more lurking, and he wasn't any more backstabbing. Now he was just baiting. Now he was out of sync with the team. Now he was useless. What's funny is, when he was succeeding, because Existence is someone he's put himself as an antagonist against, as someone where he thinks that guy's style of play doesn't work, his philosophy is shit, and people like MBK have kind of reaffirmed that to Happy, like, yeah, well, we're joining you, your style's better. Because NBK's had the success in the latter day, he's always put it on Existence that Existence isn't that good and was never as good as Happy as an in-game leader. And his reasons that he's used for that now look like a mess when you see what's happened to Happy's career. I mean, first of all, Happy did it with essentially the same player pool that Existence had. Except that when Existence had those elite players, he always had an elite team. Now, yes, he failed some majors, but all the other tournaments, he always had an elite team. He never had shit happen to him with great players like they had in EnVyUs, like coming last place at Counterpit and losing to a team like an NRG in a best of three with a standing. Nothing like that ever happened to Existence when he had NBK, Shox, Kenny S, etc. Nothing even comparable. He never dropped to that level. Then you've got to also consider that Existence has not had NBK since the late summer of 2014. Whereas the entire time since, when he's had his biggest successes, I'll give him credit, ESL Cologne he did without him, Happy has had NBK by his side. And we know that NBK has been not only the kingmaker, but he's been one of the people who's been a driving force within these teams. And he's also been someone who in all his teams has done whatever it takes to win and has been willing to change his role up and is so talented and versatile that he's been able to do that and then find a way to make that style work. So having MBK seems like one of the secrets to having a very good team, because that's what Existence did when he had all his best teams, although actually Existence accomplished a lot with Titan with a very limited setup, whereas Happy has had MBK and actually he's had some mega success and now he's had some mega failures too. And actually, with more talent, he's had less success in his failure period than Existence did in the period where he had to play with like brand new RP Cage comeback, with a fucking manager as a stand-in, with Maniac for a while, 3 months, just being terrible. He accomplished a lot more than Happy did in Happy's slump period. Then you got to add in, one of the real rationale he always used was his success at the majors, because that was his big standing point. It's still one of the best things he's accomplished. Well, yes, he wasn't the in-game leader at Columbus, but they have now bombed out of 2 majors in a row. Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe he wasn't the in-game leader at Cologne. I'm not sure. It's one of the two. But he's now bombed out of 2 majors in last place. Now, that used to be the primary point to prove that Existence's style didn't work and that Existence didn't understand the game, was outdated. You see how these sounds are familiar, doesn't it? But now when Happy's doing it, suddenly it's not a problem anymore. Oh, but you know what? That's right. Happy gave up being in-game leader. Happy's just given up the game. Well, that's something else Existence didn't do. What did Existence do when he reached his lowest point, when everything went to shit and everyone said, you know what, just retire, mate, and become a coach? He said, I will not retire until I win a major. Now, so many people have mocked that. Here's the thing. Yes, it's probably not going to happen. Yes, it's very unlikely. And if you know the political scene within the French and Belgian scenes, it's just, there's no resources to make that happen. It's a pipe dream. But you can at least admire it, right? The fighting spirit, the willingness to continue on, to pick yourself up again, to try and find a way to make the system work, to tweak things, to get a new set of players and say, okay, I've got to start at zero again. I've got to start from scratch with these guys that are tier 3 players and see what I can do and try and build them up to another level. Then one day maybe I can get a better player. To at least the fight to do that. That's something you can always rely upon. It's something you can admire, something you can follow, and that's someone who can lead you. That's the point I'm making here. Meanwhile, you look at Happy, if he's such an amazing in-game leader, a great man for the game and knows what he's talking about, then how are all these factors possible? So when he had his height of his success, where he took tier 2 and tier 3 players, and then a few rising talents in the LDLC before the French Shuffle, he took them as semis at the major, and they almost made it to the final. And I think they would have won that major if they made the final. He took them all there, and what did they do? His best players wanted to leave him to go to Titan Player of Existence. When he had the French Shuffle, and he won out thanks to NBK and Shox's machinations, and then the fact that they happened to pick him at the end, they didn't choose him as the in-game leader. They all wanted to have a chance at being an in-game leader first. It wasn't until things went badly, they didn't deliver on the expectations of the team, that they let him try being the in-game leader. Then when he started to fail, and he refused to adapt, and he didn't have the charisma to make people buy into his system, and now they're not buying into his smarts and his cunning and his wiles, now they forced him off being the in-game leader. Nothing like that's ever happened to Existence. He was only given being the in-game leader back because, first of all, the other people in the team weren't in-game leaders, so it wasn't working when they were doing it, and his own personal style sabotaged the game so much that they just had to give it back to him. It's the only way to sort of compromise with this terrorist who's holding your team hostage with his own greedy style of play. He is someone who, in this latter period, has achieved some of the worst results imaginable for someone with that level of talent, personally and in his team at that time. Some of the all-time great players, and some players who could be all-stars again. Now, Happy once said in the same interview, there's no star, there are only roles. Now, if that were true, I think he would have continued to be successful because he would have understood that he wasn't the star, that there are only roles, and he would have switched up his own role, and he would have made someone else the star, someone else the focal point, kind of like they did in Fnatic in that great lineup of 2014-2015, where they changed it up as different people were the stars, and that's how he would have accomplished success. Sadly, someone who is one of the all-time great players in Happy, and even to some degree leader in a unique tactical sense, hasn't had the charisma to sway people or to get back into the game by adapting and giving up his ego. That really has stood in his way. And that's the worst part I want to make about all of this. It's not about talent. It's not about whether he can get along with people. The big problem for Happy is it's his own character that has brought him down. It's his own flaws, which once emphasized, have destroyed him, have torn him apart, and have made him lose respect in his own teammates' eyes. In the LDLC era, I tell you, go back and watch these games. He wasn't this guy baiting. He wasn't this guy refusing to do tactics and watch demos. He wasn't someone where his team had a shoddy map pool and he didn't care about it. He wasn't someone where players were just forced into different roles and told what to do and neutralized and just left out there to die. This is someone who got the most out of his team. This is someone who had lesser players and made them more than the sum of their parts. This is someone who called real tactics and made reads in the game and prided himself on being someone who'd studied and elevated his own position and then elevated his team, and who was finding his own place within the team without always having to be the star. In fact, often wasn't the star, but making the tactic work. This is someone where he has a fantastic storyline after that, where I can empathise that he was pushed out and no one wanted him and nobody wanted him as in-game leader and his best players left him and he felt betrayed. But then you know what? He got his chance and then he saw his opportunity and then he took over a bunch of amazing star players and he did put them in different roles they never had played before and they probably wouldn't want to play, and he made it work and he won that one major then, and then later on got some other players that had actually started to slump and then he brought them back to some level of form and they won a major. This is all great. Like, if the movie ends there, great. Problem is it didn't, and it continued on, and then his own flaws, he became the tyrant. He became the person who would not change. He became the person who, to some degree, sabotaged other people's careers and was selfish in how he played, and all the things he blamed Shox and Existence and all these other people for, and became outdated and outmoded and refused to change with the times. And in the end, he just was someone who's sulking, who's had the game taken from him, who refuses to work in a team. And is that any way for someone who is one of the all-time greats and could one day again be one of the all-time greats to lead men, to lead a team?